Hey everybody, Joe and Ribs here coming at you with another SpireChat chat. Today I want to talk about specifically like the question card busted crown interaction, but I think you'll find out very rapidly that what we're actually talking about is like utility and game theory and holistic methods of analysis and understanding assumptions and stuff like this. So the reason that we're here is that I played a run where I was looking at Busted Crown and I already had a question card, and people in Twitch chat were like, Busted Crown's gonna be less bad for you because you have question card. And I was like, I mean, it's about the same amount of bad, and question card's about the same amount of good. Doesn't actually matter that much. And then a lot of people tried to explain the basic concept of marginal utility, where like having more of a resource tends to have diminishing returns, right? So if you have one hot dog for lunch, that's great. If you have 2 hot dogs for lunch, it's like, I'm starting to get sick of hot dogs. If you have 4 hot dogs for lunch, you start vomiting everywhere. This is a cut and dry example of diminishing returns on a resource. In the case of hot dogs, you get less and less value the more of them that you eat for lunch. This is a very powerful concept, the idea of diminishing returns on a resource. We can look at it for income, for example, and there have been studies done which say that the first $60,000 that you make per year is actually the only money that matters for your happiness. So they've gone so far as to say that they don't see any interaction at all between happiness and making like $120,000 a year instead of $60,000 a year. That first $60,000 gets you all your happiness. You are able to afford housing and clothes and medicine and put money away for college for your kids, transportation, all the essentials of life. And then your next $60,000 that you make, you don't have anything of value to spend it on, is sort of the argument being made. It doesn't create that happiness for individuals anymore. This is an argument that has been made in psychology a number of times, and you can expand that. It's largely the argument for reforms that try to promote income equality. So if you see that somebody has a ton of money and somebody's living off $20,000 a year, you can be like, hey, this person with $20,000 a year would be made much happier and much more productive for society if we could get them more money in their pocket, whereas that person with tons and tons of money isn't going to be hurt very much by taking money away from them. Diminishing returns, marginal utility, stuff like this. So yeah, I mean, that's a really powerful argument to make. There's nothing ridiculously wrong with that argument, but it's a very specific argument, and it relies on a understanding of a utility curve which looks sort of like this. And that's a utility curve with diminishing returns, or you could even have like that. I guess that would also be diminishing returns. You can draw the curve in lots of different ways exactly. So if this is value and this is increase in a resource. The thing about marginal utility as an economic concept is that an economic and like game theoretical concept is that marginal utility doesn't say that utility has to have diminishing, or that an increment of one more resource has to have diminishing returns. It just says that incrementing resources by 1 can have variable returns. So it could say that utility looks like this, perhaps. And this could show you marginal utility of, well, I'll go to the super easy example. Marginal utility of kneeling at a beach in 2 feet of water. Well, sometimes you're really enjoying the day, you're looking around, the sun is out and stuff, but as time passes, this is our resource here, sometimes you're underwater swallowing seaweed, and then the sun is out and you're enjoying yourself, and then a wave hits you again. This is another example of this would be marginal utility of time spent at the beach on your knees 1 foot above the water level, right? So that's sort of a comical example, but if we look at the income example, it's not necessarily the case that like at $60,000 you get to this point of happiness and along the way everything's about the same. It could be the case that like up until you get a certain amount of money, you just sort of can't do anything and you're miserable. But once you start to get to a point where you can like afford healthcare and stuff, now you're starting to get value out of your life. You get to a point where you're getting transportation and insurance and putting money away for your kids' college, and all of a sudden that's where you hit it. Like all of a sudden you can't get more value. And this is not really diminishing returns at all. It's actually incrementing returns for a while and then diminishing returns. And I'm not saying that this is how the curve works, but I'm saying that that might be how the curve looks, right? So if you look at Slay the Spire, and we look at our utility in Slay the Spire, utility in Slay the Spire is about win rate. And so if this is our chance to win, and this is the number of floors we go through, for example, and here's the end of Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, and the heart. And specifically what I know is not our chance to win, but our chance to beat the heart with the deck we have right now. The resources that we have available to us make our deck better and better at winning, but they don't all do it equally. For example, at the boss fight, our chance to win goes up by more because we get a boss relic and a rare card and stuff like that. Another thing about Slay the Spire is that it's balanced, going back to the surf analogy, it's balanced sort of like you're surfing on a wave. And the wave gets sort of tougher and tougher and tougher to surf along. And your deck tries to stay sort of in the right zone. Now, if your deck gets to a point where it's way too strong, you fall off that wave. You stop enjoying the game. The game stops presenting reasonable challenges to you. And you win the run easily, presumably. Or you get so bored that you stop playing or lose the run. This is a common problem in games like this, that if the game lets you get too strong, the sort of basic fundamentals of the game stop working. And that can be fun for you, like a couple of times maybe. It can be fun to do the Dead Branch Corruption run where everything's just insane and you're winning. But over time, the basic systems of the game that make the game very appealing, like facing new threats and having to work out which card is best and stuff like that, they stop mattering because your deck's just way too strong for them to matter. And so that's where it gets bad. If your deck doesn't get strong enough, it goes this way and it like dies right here, right? So you stop getting to play the game because your deck has died for that run. So a game like this tries to balance itself so that you're constantly around about the right place in difficulty. And because the game is balanced like this, as you go through a run of Slay the Spire, your ability to beat the heart with an Act 1 deck is like 0. You like couldn't ever beat the heart with an Act 1 deck, just about. Maybe there's some run where you get Dead Branch and Corruption really early, and you could get lucky and beat the heart, even though you don't have enough cards or relics in your deck to support it yet. But maybe if you just lucked into the right exhausts, all of a sudden you could beat the heart with the deck that you have on like floor 5. But it's very, 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 very uncommon. It's a minuscule chance. What's actually happening through Act 1 is you're getting to a point where you can beat the Act 1 boss, right? And then you get into Act 2, and sometimes decks start to get pretty strong in Act 2, I would say. So maybe there's like a small chance that by the time you're at the end of Act 2, you actually have a deck that could beat the heart if everything's come together really well. But usually it's more like around about Act 3, you start getting stronger and stronger cards. You already have a lot of cards in place, so you understand which card's going to click together with the other ones to build your synergies all together and get you to a point where you have a really strong deck. There are events in Act 3 which are better than the events in Act 2. There are events which like give you 999 gold or a rare relic or things like that. And then those events in turn are better than the events in Act 1, right? Also in Act 3, you're being offered upgraded cards a decent amount of the time. The elite fights, your deck should be able to manage them. You can pick up the super elite, stuff like this. And then you do the boss fights, and you get into Act 4 and find out if you can actually beat the heart. This curve is a little bit more smooth than I really wanted to show it, but I think in terms of if you asked me throughout a run what my chance to beat the heart with the deck right now was, and you'd asked me that every day for the last 3 months for every run that I did on every floor or something like that, you'd end up looking at a curve that was something like this, where my chance to beat the heart is like non-existent in Act 1, starts to turn on in Act 2, and starts to get better and better in Act 3. So to like motivate what I'm about to say, I want to frame it in terms of acts, because acts are a resource and card rewards are a resource. So let's say that I picked up a relic that gave me another act, and it was, you know, another act, sort of like Act 3, and my deck kept on getting stronger and stronger and stronger, and then I had to fight the heart after that act instead. Cat. 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 Alright. Sometimes the solution to the problem is to throw a beanie at something. So our chances to win the run increase by probably a lot from doing that. We're already at a point where the game was meant to have given us about the right amount of resources to beat the heart by this point, and now we're getting free extra stuff, sort of. And we're going to get a whole bunch of it, right? Because we're getting an entire extra act. That's what this relic does. It's called Question Act. It gives us a 4th act instead of only having 3. Cool. Now let's suppose that there was a boss relic that said that we have to fight the heart at the end of Act 1. But with Question Act, we could fight the heart at the end of Act 2 instead. We could get Question Act and this boss relic and go from 1 act to 2 acts. Well, if we look at this curve, getting that 2nd act is only giving us this much value. It's actually not giving us very much value at all compared to what I think getting the 4th act would give us. And the reason is that the utility curve doesn't work the way that we're thinking it does. It isn't a utility curve where our chance to win is like this, in which case Question Act would be significantly more valuable here than here. Apparently we have a cat cameo in this video. Alright, so I mean, I legitimately think that card rewards work a lot like this. Card rewards are a resource in this game. You get a certain amount of them. There's an expectation that by the end of the run you've gotten enough card rewards to beat the boss, and I think that card rewards have a value that looks like something like that, probably. That's probably their curve. So I don't think that the card reward screen, I don't think that it's really reasonable to say that it has diminishing returns. I think that card reward screen has like fairly linear returns, or maybe even incremental returns over the course of a run of Slay the Spire. Now, that's my opinion, and that's like sort of anecdotal. There's this problem where we have to bring assumptions to a game that's very, very complicated, right? And there's nobody in the world who's solved this game, so we have to talk about what we believe about the game. But that's me just communicating what I believe about the card rewards in this game. And so when I think about going from 3-card scene to 4-card scene, I'm actually like pretty excited. And when I go from 1-card scene to 2-card scene, I'm like, yeah, usually I'm not getting enough of the resource that I needed to win the run, because the game is balanced for me to win the run off 3-card scene. And 2-card scene or 1-card scene, both of those are immensely important drawbacks to recognize. Card rewards are one of the most important resources in the game, right? That's where it's a deck builder. You have to put cards in your deck to build the deck. So going through a run with 1 or 2-card scene per choice is going to put you at a significant disadvantage. Going through a run with 3-card scene per choice is around where the game is meant to be balanced. You should be getting around about the right strength of deck. And going through a run with 4 cards is going to tend to give you a deck that's like stronger than it needs to be to win the run, because the game is balanced well for Ascension 20, in my opinion. Cool. So I didn't interact with the math of like 1 to 2 is 100% increase, 3 to 4 is 33% increase yet. I don't know how much I want to get into that, because like if you've taken 1 quarter of statistics, you might say that, but if you take another 3 years of statistics, you'll be like, oh yeah, that doesn't make sense. And like background on me, I took graduate level statistics. I was interested in being a lecturer for statistics at a university as my profession. I spent college analyzing just very, very, very complicated data sets and loving it. And that's one of the reasons that I really enjoy games and why I got into poker, because poker is largely about analyzing how a population plays poker and working out how to abuse that, how to exploit it. But it turned out that I didn't really like being a university professor, so I ended up streaming. So I don't know that I want to try to put together like a graduate level university lecture as YouTube content. It doesn't seem very enjoyable. But just to interact with the math exactly of like having one card increase to 2 is 100% increment, and going from 3 to 4 is 33% ratio increment or whatever. And hopefully what I just said makes you realize that like that's maybe not the right way to approach thinking about it to begin with. But if we're thinking about that, one, we're forgetting about the skip option, right? So our assumptions going into a comparison like that are that card choices are independent of each other and that they are random. And they aren't random because you always get a skip button, which is non-random. You can always choose a skip. So if you have cards and their value is distributed from 1 to 10, I don't know exactly what value is here. We've untethered ourselves from the game a little bit, but we're having to for this abstraction, unfortunately. On average, the first card will be worth 5. If we assume that they're like standard normal distribution centered on 5, so it looks like this, and at the middle there's a 5. At the middle is 5, and on the ends are like 0 and 10. That's the standard normal. It's a normal distribution, it's not the standard. Whatever. Like I said, this wasn't what I wanted to do with my life. Don't mind me, I'm having fun. The first card will on average be worth 5, and so there will be like a 50% chance basically that the next card will be better than it. But the thing is that skip exists, right? And skip is probably like a 6 out of 10. It's better than most of the commons, some of the uncommons, and a few of the rares at any point in a run. And so like the existence of skip massively reduces the effect that you're thinking about, because you can always just click the skip button and have a pretty good option available to you. Also, we're now analyzing the game with assumptions that don't make sense, and I'm saying things because of those assumptions that I hate to say, so this is just stressful for me. Another assumption that you're making is that card choices are independent of each other, which it's not true microcosmically. You can't see the same card twice in the card reward screen. So if you see 3 cards, you can't see 2 catalysts there, right? So if you generated a catalyst with the first card and then the second card was trying to be an uncommon, it couldn't be a catalyst again. Or if you generated a different uncommon with the first card and then the second card was trying to be an uncommon, it would have a higher chance to be a catalyst because there would be 1 fewer uncommon that it could be other than catalyst. So that influences the magnitude of this effect that you're seeing a bit. But the really big assumption break that's happening that is completely busting the analogy, the extension of basic statistics to this system, is that rare card generation isn't an independent thing. Rare card generation in this game starts at minus 2% chance to generate a rare card, and every time you see a common card, the chance of seeing a rare goes up by 1%. So you start the act, you see 3 commons, the rare chance goes from minus 2% to 1%. At the next fight, you see 3 cards, each of them has a 1% chance to be a rare. When you generate a rare, it goes back down to 2%, or back down to minus 2% again. And at the end of the act, when you get the boss fight and you see the rare card reward screens, that will reset it to minus 2% for the start of the next act as well. And so this actually completely busts the entire argument, because it means that Question Card is a lot better at making you new rares without Busted Crown than it is with Busted Crown. We ran some simulations on Discord. This was one of them that we did, which I thought Crocketeer presented in a way that was very easy to present to an audience and have them understand what was going on exactly. So we looked at fights taken throughout an act, We didn't look at elite fights for interests of like sharing fully. So at an elite fight, there's an increase of 10% for your rare chance just for that floor. So if you were at -2%, it would actually be 8% for that fight reward screen. But we didn't look at those. We were just looking at hallway fights. And if you look at hallway fights taken in the act, the card generated by question card is actually, what does it say? It's about 3.5 times as likely to be a rare after you take 4 hallway fights in an act, which is pretty normal. It's pretty normal to have 4 hallway fights in an act, I feel like. It's 4 times as likely, 3.5 times as likely to generate a rare for you without Busted Crown as it is with Busted Crown in that situation. So to frame this in a way that makes sense in a run that you're actually doing, if you take Busted Crown at the end of Act 1, walk into Act 2, have 3 hallway fights, and then an elite fight. Without Busted Crown, question card was 5 times as likely to make you a rare card before that elite fight than it was with Busted Crown. If you need like an Immolate to beat the elite, or a Malaise or a Wraith form or something like that to beat the elite in electrodynamics, question card is 5 times, 500% more likely to make you a rare card before that elite, on the 3rd hallway fight, right before the elite fight. So the entire argument breaks because of that non-independence. And this is only one part of the argument that I'm examining now, and it doesn't interact with all the other stuff. And I'm going to stop talking about it now because I think this is the wrong thing to be talking about, honestly. But I wanted to like present the dangers of bringing assumptions about the world to a place where they don't exist, where they don't hold. And I think I did a decent job of that, right? Like we talked about how the marginal utility curve that we're assuming doesn't make that much sense. We talked about the assumptions of independence and randomness don't make much sense. Yeah, I think we talked about that a bit. Okay, so what you need to do instead of doing this, and I think I don't want to be like, I don't want to be strawmanning other people, right? But a pattern that I see in analyzing a game like this is that someone sees something and it's sort of the inverse of a different thing, and human brains are really good at seeing patterns. So when they come to like a new thing, or they're learning something that, you know, Slay the Spire is a new game, right? You cannot possibly have spent your entire life playing Slay the Spire because it's a new game. So you come to this new place and you're looking for patterns to connect and ways to start to make sense of things. And so you see question card gives you +1 card, Busted Crown takes away 2 cards. Those things connect strongly because the thing that they do, they're sort of inverse of one another. After Image makes you 1 block every time you play a card. The Heart deals damage to you every time you play a card. Those things connect. After Image would be good against the Heart. Now, After Image, that's not what makes After Image good. And generally, when you examine these connections further, you realize that they're sort of not really making very much sense. After Image makes you 1 block for every card you play every turn, and the Heart deals you damage for every card that you play every turn. Which means that After Image is good against the Heart if you're playing lots of cards every turn, right? But we can simplify that. After Image is good if you're playing lots of cards per turn. That's the only thing that's actually going on. If you play 8 cards per turn in a hallway fight, After Image makes you 8 block. If you play 8 cards per turn against the Heart, After Image makes you 8 block. So a lot of these patterns that we're creating, and I feel like I have not explained that enough, and somebody's going to come into YouTube comments and try to argue that After Image is better against the Heart, which I don't. When you make these patterns, when you connect these things, and like this is the inverse of that other thing, like a lot of the time, the conclusion you're making doesn't make sense. What you need to do to understand something this complicated is try to get an idea of everything that's going on and understand it holistically and understand how the rules are working and maybe like write simulations of it, play a ton of it, talk to other people who are playing a ton of it and thinking about it, in an analytical way, not bringing assumptions from outside this game, which don't hold to this game, and trying to force them onto the game, but coming to Slay the Spire and analyzing what Slay the Spire is, and trying to build an understanding of how to play Slay the Spire naively, like without assuming this is like marginal utility in economics, this is like Hearthstone, this is like Magic the Gathering. If you come to the game with those assumptions, you get anchored to those assumptions, you get stuck to them, and no matter how much you play Slay the Spire, you're always going to be tethered to them a little bit unless you can get away. And I talked a lot about the concept of anchoring in my video about archetypes on YouTube, if you want to go check that one out. The problem with archetypes, I think, is what I called it. So, in order to model this game holistically, the approach that I took was I tried to understand all the resources that were available to me in the game, all the challenges which were available to beat me in the game, and tried to understand which resources were better against which challenges and how frequently I could leverage a resource to beat a certain thing and stuff like that, and just played 2,500 hours of the game while thinking sort of like that. Just lots and lots and lots of work. You could like probably hook a neural network up to this game and it would come up with some really interesting results, but failing that, coming to the game with an open mind and playing a lot and practicing a lot is probably the best you can do. Learning from mistakes, getting to a point where you're not making very many mistakes. A problem with learning the game right is that if you are a player who makes mistakes, the answers that you're going to get for other things are going to be wrong. If you're a player who uses the card Malaise incorrectly when you pick Malaise, you will think that Malaise is not strong enough to pick when it is, and then everything about your evaluations for silent cards will be wrong because you're not leveraging Malaise properly. So spending a ton of time very forcefully, very deliberately trying to work out how do I get the maximum value out of different things. This is a game where you can get stuck on local maximas, where you learn how to create the most value from a set of cards, like Perfected Strike, or Whirlwind plus Flex, or something like that. And because you understand how to create value from those cards, you get stuck there. And when you get offered a Shrug It Off or something like that, that doesn't fit into your strategy and you don't pick it. Or if you do pick it, well, for that run it didn't fit into your strategy, so it doesn't perform very well. So it's a very, very, very difficult game to get a full understanding of. And when people ask me what I think the cap for win rates is of this game, I give like 10% higher than my win rate at least, but I don't really know because I don't know for sure how many local maximas I'm stuck at in the way that I'm thinking about the game. I think that at this point, for Ironclad and Silent, and I'm like 80% confident for Defect, I think that I understand the main packages that can be put together to deal damage and to mitigate damage and to manipulate a deck fully, I think. But when I'm in Act 1 and I'm being presented a pick between two cards and one of them would sort of fit toward one strategy and another would fit toward the other strategy, I very commonly am not sure which card is the right one to be picking. Because there are all sorts of things like how often does that strategy come together? When it does come together, how often does it actually beat the heart? And these are questions that I don't have exact numerical answers for. I don't know the exact value. Also, how impactful would picking one card which takes me away from another strategy be? Could I pivot toward that strategy again, sort of thing? So there's just a ton of stuff to think about. It's just really complicated. It's just really, really, really complicated is what I'm trying to get across to you. And in all this complexity, when I'm looking at Busted Crown, the main things that I'm thinking about are, can my deck win with greatly reduced card choices? And like usually the answer is no. At the end of Act 1, if I pick Busted Crown, it's usually like, okay, well I'm gonna die in Act 3, but I'll get further than I would have if I picked like the Cursed Bell, which was the other option, or something like that. And maybe if I get a really good store or a really good relic, I can win the run sort of thing, right? But I pick Busted Crown thinking my deck is going to peter out because I'm not getting enough of the card resource that is so vital for my runs to win. There are lots of things to think about when I'm picking Busted Crown, like if I have feed in my deck, I'm going to want to go to hallway fights, which is going to mean that I'm going to want to generate a lot of card reward screens, which is going to mean that the impact of Busted Crown is going to be more significant. Whereas if I have Juzu Bracelet and a deck which is bad at hallway fights, I may want to go to lots of events. And if I go to lots of events, that means that my deck is getting stronger in a way which doesn't require the card reward screen. I'm not trying to leverage that resource as much, which means that if I handicap it, it doesn't hurt me as much. So like Feed or Juzu Bracelet. If I have Singing Bowl, now the non-random card reward screen option gives me +2 max HP. And so that's significantly better. How valuable is that HP though? If I'm playing a deck with Reaper and Strength Gain in it, the HP may be very valuable. But if I'm playing a deck that doesn't currently have any scaling at all, so I don't get anything out of being able to block a couple attacks with my face, because after I have, I'm still just in a spot where I'm doing nothing, maybe the HP doesn't even offer me much reasonable, thought that I'll win the run. So if I have a deck that's good at scaling, not very good at front loading, and I have Singing Bowl, all of a sudden Busted Crown is looking quite a bit better, because it means that I'm going to get my front-loaded stuff out of having max HP to block the incoming attacks, and I already have my scaling in place. I already have like a Demon Form and a Reaper and a Limit Break or something like that, right? So that's how I'm actually approaching this. That's how I'm actually thinking about it. And the general goal that I set out with on this video was to try to convey to people that they shouldn't be bringing assumptions which don't apply to something as complicated as Slay the Spire. But not only that, but you also shouldn't be bringing assumptions that don't apply to other things which are complicated in life. Don't assume that if you start a relationship with a person, they are the same socially as other people that you've had relationships with, for example. Don't assume that the culture in the country that you're visiting is the same as your own. I don't want to... This isn't meant to be like a motivational video, and I don't want to try to tell somebody else how to live their life. But a thing that humans do very consistently in the world, as I've observed, based on my experience, just very, very consistently, is that they assume that they know more about something than they actually do, and sort of screw themselves over because of it. Hurt themselves and sometimes hurt others because they come into something and are, whether it's because they're too proud or too stubborn or just don't realize what they're doing, whether they're like just legitimately personally confident, they try to take a solution that worked for a different problem and use it for a problem which it doesn't work for. And that can just be pretty bad. Sometimes it will work, but a lot of the time it won't. And I think that games are a lot more fun to play if you go through the game without assuming that you already know things about it from playing other games. And I also think that life is more fun to live if I go through life, and when I'm placed in new situations, I don't assume that I already know what's going on. If I'm placed in a situation, I let myself be naive and be new and not understand everything that's happening, and I try to build up an understanding of what's actually going on so that as I'm in that situation more and more, I can, excel in it eventually. So, we went from there to here, and I hope that it was a good journey. Thanks for hanging out. I hope you enjoyed the Spireside chat. And, yeah, I hope you understand why I can't just give this answer when I'm streaming live, right? Like, there are some things as a streamer where a thing comes up quite often, but the answer to it's really long. And so I can't there's no way I can package the answer I just gave into 30 seconds, really. I don't know how I would. And so, like, I make a YouTube video where I talk about it for 30 minutes, then I link people to it instead. So, hope you've enjoyed, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.